So glad you're with us for the Monday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. Tomorrow is Election Day in Virginia, New York City, and New Jersey, and lots of places around the country, but those places have the most watchable races for national political purposes. We'll be talking about New Jersey in just a second, and a great closing ad from Republican nominee Jack Ciattarelli. We'll also be taking a look at a new survey from Axios showing that American college students have it exactly backwards on whether they're favorable towards socialism or capitalism. The numbers are not encouraging. And we'll also talk about the latest incident involving South Carolina Republican Congresswoman Nancy Mace, who is now running for governor of South Carolina. Sadly, this is not an isolated incident. So, Jim, and everybody's expecting us to talk football, and we will towards the end. But tomorrow's Election Day. You and I can't go anywhere right now without seeing campaign ads. I was watching the Redskins game last night while talking to my family on the phone, and at halftime there's like 4 straight political ads. One's for Sears, one's for Spanberger, one's for Yaris, one's for Jones, and it's going to go away briefly, but it's going to go away in a couple days.
Greg, the what game last night? What team?
I don't call
it. Maybe they're officially that's a sign that Greg's not on board with all these politically correct. You know, you're yearning. Last night was the night when they had the throwback uniforms of the Washington football team era with the big W on it. You know, I just want to point out, Commanders fans, you could go. First of all, it sounds like they're going to stick with the Commanders name for the foreseeable future.
They are.
Magic Johnson was one of the minority owners of the team, and he used to play for, I believe, Michigan State, and they are the Spartans. Am I remember right? Am I correct on this?
Yep.
Okay. So there was talk that if they were going to rename away from the Commanders, which everybody kind of responded with okay, I guess. Nobody was like, nobody loves it. Nobody really hates it. But like for that military theme, it's just kind of a generic W on the side and stuff. People said, what if they were the Spartans? And here's the thing. What did Spartans use? Spartans used spears. And there was, for a while, the Washington Redskins had the yellow helmet with the spear on it. And then for a while, they went back to a burgundy helmet with a spear on it. So you could go back to the old uniforms without the Native American Indian head on top, but you could have the spear. And I think fans would love it. Every once in a while, they wear those as throwback uniforms. So they look really good. So Washington Commanders, that's my free offer to you, since and my sympathies to Liz and all my Commander friends out there. Not a great season. Yeah, everything goes right last year. Things not going right this year.
So, Jim, what's your Election Day routine? I already voted early when I did used to go, and you can still do this at the early voting locations. You know, they've always got the literature. Here's your sample ballot kind of thing. I used to take a bunch of Democratic sample ballots, hoping they would run out, until the day the guy gave me his whole stack and said, "Oh no, don't worry about it. I got boxes still in the car." Yeah, that strategy is now no longer employed.
Did you not check turnout usually at that polling place? And I need 8 million copies of my voting. I vote early in the morning. For a while there, I was voting absentee. This is back when I'd be like traveling to the Blaze or something on Election Day. That's not out of suspicion of mail ballots or anything like that. It just is. I can do it in the morning, and I usually try to get there around the same time, and I try to measure what's the turnout. It never turns out to be particularly useful in terms of, turnout is high, turnout is low, or something like that. In fact, every Election Day, I should save this for tomorrow's show, but just kind of observe. If you're ever watching live television on Election Day, I'm reporting to you live from the pre-work hours, and turnout, the line is out the building. Turnout looks like it's good. Then you go to mid-morning. It's really slowed down. It's lunchtime. There's another long line again. It's going to be big turnout mid-afternoon. Well, actually, the lines have disappeared. It's pretty empty here. It's almost as if people vote before work, on their lunch hour, or after work. Yes, there are senior citizens and people who voted other hours, but don't read too much into that. That's the pattern that happens every single year. It doesn't mean anything. So.
Yeah, no question about it. So, all right, we'll talk about what's happening in New Jersey in just a second. That's a very close governor's race, and one certainly worth watching. But first, let's talk about dose. Look, we're all trying to feel healthy, right? At least we should be. And drinking more water is part of that, getting your steps in, taking vitamins. But here's what most people miss: your liver health. It affects literally everything: your energy, your digestion, and it's time to show it some love. And you can show it love with Dose for Your Liver, a clinically backed liver health supplement, a liquid supplement taken in a daily 2-ounce shot and tastes like fresh squeezed orange juice. It's fantastic. It cleanses the liver of unwanted stressors that's slowing your liver down. It's got 0 sugar, 0 junk, and 0 calories.
As Greg and I mentioned, it's election season, or for some of us, drinking season. But that can be rough on your liver. And you think about it, your liver, it processes everything you consume. It performs more than 500 daily functions. Think about energy production, digestion, fat metabolism, vitamin storage. And when your liver is overworked, you're going to feel it. So if you start drinking Dose daily, you're going to reduce that sluggishness. You're going to get rid of those midday crashes. You're going to support your metabolism, and it'll even aid your daily digestion.
So are you ready to give your liver the support it deserves? Head to dosedaily.co/3ml or enter 3ml to get 35% off the first month of your subscription. Your body does so much for you. Let's do something for it. That's dosedaily.co/3ml for 35% off your first month's subscription. All right, Jim, as mentioned, all eyes on Virginia, New Jersey, New York City, but make sure you pay attention to your local races too. Your vote has a significant impact on those ballot initiatives and city council and school board and all that stuff. So make sure you get out to vote tomorrow. In New Jersey, close race between Mikie Sherrill, the Democrat, the Congresswoman, as well as Republican businessman Jack Ciattarelli, who came really close to beating Phil Murphy 4 years ago, but didn't quite get there. So he's the nominee again. We've talked about Mikie Sherrill's issues with her investments, which scored her $7 million conveniently as she served on the House Armed Services Committee. She's never had a good answer for that. And of course, her problems at the Naval Academy, not being able to walk at commencement because she refused to cooperate in a cheating scandal. She was not accused of cheating, but she refused to help investigators in that particular situation. And so she had an interview the other day, and it's always one of these softball interviews, just like, hey, how would you be different than Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, that trips up these Democrats? And this time, Mikie Sherrill has asked the extremely difficult question: if you could pass one piece of legislation, what would it be? Listen to this.
So, last question. If you could pass one piece of legislation,
what would it be?
Wow, I would love, that's a really good question because there's so many that are coming to mind right now. But right now, I would love at this point to pass legislation to just send a federal block grant back to states, back to the state of New Jersey, to run some really key programs and innovate on them.
Was Mikie Sherrill ever Miss Teen South Carolina? Because that's kind of the answer that I'm getting there about maps in the Iraq. I don't remember that one, Jim, from back in the day. But anyway, what you're hearing as that music's playing and some of those other sound effects is fight inflation, reduce crime, improve schools. And all she gets to is, well, we're supposed to get a block grant, and so maybe we'll use that on a few programs. And so she said that so many things are coming to mind. I've been in that moment, Jim. Literally nothing was coming to mind, which was her problem.
So I'm reminded of the question to Ted Kennedy. Again, probably one of the easiest questions you're ever going to get when you announce you're running for president. Came from Roger Mudd of CBS News to then Senator Kennedy. Why do you want to be president? Now, again, if you're going to run for president, you better have an answer for that one. But instead, Ted Kennedy hesitated. His eyes, he's kind of, he just gives this long, alphabet soup of an answer with absolutely no answers there. And I'd say, oh my God, I haven't seen a Mudd take out a presidential candidate like that since Samuel Mudd played a role in the Abraham Lincoln assassination. See, we get some really deep cut historical jokes here on the Three Martini Lunch podcast. Look, this is the basic one. This is about as easy as you can get. And I know I'm not convinced that Ciattarelli is going to win. But I would just note that right now the Real Clear Politics average, as what I checked a few moments ago, the margin of error was 3.1 percentage points. They were off 4 years ago. They were off by 4 percentage points. And as we remember, Phil Murphy came very close to losing that one. So if it's the same, variance, same problem in the polls, then actually Republicans could win this one. Now you're doing the math on that. That still leads to a 1% Republican win. So that's not a huge margin for error. I think what is likely to happen is we're likely to get a Republicans finishing close but no cigar in this one, which would be frustrating because Sherrill is a deeply flawed candidate. I know that there was a lot of Democrats were convinced just like with Spanberger, we're going to go with a suburban one that's moderate, wink, wink, military experience. Spanberger was in the CIA and law enforcement. We're gonna run biographical ads, and we're not going to get into specifics and all that stuff. That should not win in an environment like this. This should not win when people are really angry about electricity rates and everything else. So we can't say that the Republican campaign took it easy on Sherrill as a candidate, and we cannot say that they didn't, have good material to work with. They hit her hard. Now it's, we'll see how the voting goes. Again, New Jersey is a very blue state. Only Chris Christie has won statewide races in the last generation or so. So it's frustrating. But we'll see what happens. And I do think that if Ciattarelli was capable of winning, if he does win tomorrow, I think that changes the entire narrative. Even if Mamdani wins in New York, and even if Spanberger wins in Virginia, I think people would end up talking about that as a giant upset and a sign that a state that was supposed to be safe Democrat isn't safe at all in an environment where Democrats think they're doing really well.
Yeah, now I think you're right about that because, the 4 years ago, Biden was president. Things had just gone horrible in Afghanistan. Inflation was starting to rise. And so now Trump's in office. The Democrats will obviously try to use that as a weapon in their campaign. They just trotted out Barack Obama in New Jersey and Virginia. Jim, I don't know if there's much to this. I think there's some to this. What do you make of the argument that once we got close to Election Day, the Democrats couldn't vote to reopen the government on the GOP's terms because it would depress their base, and that they'll probably reopen it later this week once the elections are done?
Yeah, I think there's an overestimation of how much any given event in the news cycle affects people's voting. I don't think Afghanistan, you and I talked about in this podcast a lot 4 years ago. It's a very huge deal. I don't know if that affects how people want to vote for the governor of New Jersey. I don't know if that affects how people want to vote for the governor of Virginia. They're not in the military chain of command. Terry McAuliffe has a lot of flaws, and I could rip into him all day long, but in the end, he did not make any decisions regarding Afghanistan, right? So, but on the other hand, I guess maybe the idea is that what's going on in the news depresses people or makes people less likely to vote. I think if people want to vote for a person, they're going to vote. And it's it's a bad news cycle for my party. Well, I'm going to stay home. Could that happen for some people on the margin? Sure, but there are people who there was coverage of a guy who voted for Trump twice and who now is voting for Mamdani up in New York City. And you're trying to look at the Venn diagram of how the Trump worldview and the Mamdani worldview. Other news, this guy said he's a huge Indianapolis Colts fan up until yesterday. He just wants to back a winner.
Wow. All right. Well, we'll see what happens, and hopefully we'll get some good news in some of these places. I don't think it's coming from New York City, but
I have a very hard time believing that that's a huge factor in these sorts of things.
Yeah. Well, good luck. Make sure you vote tomorrow. That's all I say. Wherever you live in the country, make sure you take that time to get out and vote if you haven't done that already. All right. Well, once again today, I am happy to be wearing a fantastic new shirt that I got from Mizzen and Main. They sent me about a half a dozen of them several weeks ago, along with a couple of great pair of pants, and they fit well. They feel good. They just feel loose, good material, and it gets even better than that because unlike most dress clothes that are uncomfortable, high maintenance, or you have to iron them all the time or take them to the dry cleaners all the time, you don't have to deal with any of that with Mizzen and Main.
Mizzen and Main makes classic menswear with performance fabric, so it's effortless to look sharp and feel great. They actually invented the performance fabric dress shirt more than 10 years ago, and since then they've perfected it with modern fabrics. Stretchy, lightweight, moisture-wicking, wrinkle-resistant, and completely machine washable.
Right now, Mizzen and Main is offering 3 Martini Lunch listeners 20% off your first purchase at mizzenandmain.com. Promo code 3ML20. That's Mizzen, spelled M-I-Z-Z-E-N, and Main, M-A-I-N.com. Promo code 3ML20 for 20% off. Mizzenandmain.com. Promo code 3ML20. And if you'd rather shop in person, you can find Mizzen and Main stores in select states. All right, Jim, on to our bad and I'd say also somewhat crazy martini. This hat tip to Town Hall, but the poll is from Axios. Socialism beats capitalism among U.S. college students, according to a new Axios Generation Lab poll. 67% of survey respondents say they hold a positive or neutral association with the word socialism, compared with 40% with the word capitalism. And of course, this is all in the whole wake of talking about socialists with Mamdani and others as the Democratic Party lurches more in that direction. Here are the actual numbers. 34% of surveyed 2- and 4-year college students say they have a somewhat or very positive view of socialism, compared with 17% who say the same for capitalism. Just 17%. Negative views of capitalism outweigh negative views of socialism by an even greater difference. 53% have a negative view of capitalism. Only 23% overall has a negative view of socialism. 1 in 3 has a neutral view of socialism. 1 in 4 has a neutral view of capitalism. I'm hoping the neutral people realize they don't know much about it, and that's why they don't have an opinion. I have a feeling that there's a lot of people who do have an opinion that also don't know much about it. 47% of Democrats and 31% of independents, but just 5% of Republicans are favorable towards socialism. 45% of Republicans, 17% of independents, and 7% of Democrats have positive reactions to capitalism. 7% of Democrats. So, Jim, we know that college campuses are not exactly breeding grounds for open thought and debate, and the professors are pushing a lot of bad ideas at these kids, but these numbers stink.
They do. And Greg, I got to tell you, when you look at that, I would have figured that both Republican college students would have supported capitalism. Nationwide. Secondly, you and I have talked about college students on this podcast many times. We've been doing this for 15 years, but it feels different this year. So, Greg, you have the numbers in front of you. Did they break it down for incoming freshmen of highly regarded engineering schools in Massachusetts? Because there's one student in particular I expect to answer that question really well. My son, my child. So there you go. I did my part to try to move the numbers in that direction. A bit more seriously, though, this is, I kind of wonder, because we talked about, we alluded to the New York City mayor's race in the last Martini. There are a whole bunch of people who are highly educated, living in New York City. The whole country feels like it's got a high cost of living thanks to Biden inflation of the last couple of years. But like people feel like, I just can't get ahead. I'm looking to find jobs. None of the jobs are paying well enough. Seems like things get more expensive each day. Or each week. When you're a student, you've lived with your parents. Your parents have probably worked for a lot of years. And where you are in your parenting years is probably a different spot than where you are when you started your career right out of college in your early 20s. So if you're a child, if you're a college student now, you've been living on mom and dad's dime. And mom and dad have worked their way up to have a pretty decent lifestyle, hopefully. Now, different people have different circumstances. You go into the job market. Your first job is not going to be your highest paying job. Your first job is probably going to stink. And I've tried to warn this to my kids, the sense that like when you're starting out in any career, it's going to be really tough. You're going to be paid less than you expected. Your hours going to be work. You're going to be doing all the grunt work. Welcome to the career ladder in the United States. By the way, I'm open to the argument that this has actually gotten tougher for young people. That from both the internet era moving on to this, all the innovations of AI, companies eliminate their entry-level jobs. The number of, the office person who just run around as a gopher, back as an intern at the Washington bureau of the Dallas Morning News. I was going through the mail, collating, answering the phones, refilling the toner in the photocopier, grunt work. This is not glamorous work, but this is like the first rung on the ladder. This is how you get into this office environment and how you learn how to do things that are professional. I suspect there are a lot of people who lived pretty comfortably with mom and dad, lived fairly comfortably in a dorm environment in college. Again, on mom and dad paying the bills, or scholarships, or loans, or all these other things. And then they get into the working world, and life is hard. The career path is hard. Opportunities for advancement aren't coming as quickly and easily as they hoped. And it gives them this sense of, well, it can't be that my sociology degree isn't doing any good. It can't be that I didn't, my pottery, specialization, my women's studies, my ethnic studies. It can't be that all that failed. It must be the system has failed. Yeah. Well, look around. Do you see a lot of billionaire sociology majors? Do you see a lot of people who are making money hand over fist when they, probably not. So you probably have to recognize the fact that what you choose, if you study really hard stuff, you tend to do pretty well. And I'm hoping things work out at engineering school up in Massachusetts. But, it's one of those things where you have to what you put into it is kind of what you get out of it. Life is not going to be a very easy path. And I think that's at the heart of this is that I have not succeeded. America, they think of as a capitalist system. By the way, talk to actual libertarians or Republicans. We'll point out it's not that capitalist system. We have a whole bunch of different forms of government intervention in the economy, but fine, we'll put that aside. They look at capitalism and say, well, I haven't gotten what I wanted. Ergo, capitalism has failed. Bernie Sanders and AOC and Zoran Mamdani, they're promising the moon, and I'm sure that'll work out because history is full of examples of socialist governments always working out hunky-dory.
So, Jim, the assumption I think that a lot of us had with Mamdani was that he's a self-avowed socialist, so obviously this guy is unacceptable. Now that we've got 2/3 of college students saying this, and maybe some other people are saying, I don't know much about socialism, but I know things are too expensive, so hey, why not give him a shot? Does the right have to change how we talk about this?
I think, one, we might not need to talk about it, but also nothing teaches you more. So I really think we should be running college for exchange programs to North Korea, to Cuba, to actually, like, I'm saying this kind of tongue in cheek, but kind of not, that like, if you think America is a really terrible place and that we have, does America have poverty? Sure. Lots of other countries have worse poverty. Does America have inequality? Sure. Lots of other countries have worse inequality. America's got, an imperfect system of advancing and improving your lot in life, but it's probably better. Like you don't see Floridians jumping into rafts and trying to row their way to Cuba, right? There's a pretty clear signal. Those rafts are only going in one direction through shark-infested water. That's a pretty clear signal about which system actually works. And if you go and try to live in Cuba as a Cuban, not as a wealthy US or Canadian tourist or something, maybe you get a more eye-opening look at what the actual consequences of socialism is. Because everybody keeps insisting, oh no, I want the nice Norway form of socialism. Okay, first step, discover some enormous oil and natural gas resources that you can sell to other countries. That makes it a lot easier to pay for all the stuff that you want under a socialist government.
Yeah, no question. Although Venezuela found a way to screw that up, so it can still be ruined even if you do have all those resources. But wow. All right. Well, let's talk about something better than that, especially if you're running your own business, because running a business on a clunky old phone system is like competing with one hand tied behind your back, and every time you miss a call, that's potentially leaving money on the table. But Quo, formerly OpenPhone, is the modern alternative, and it's built to help you work smarter, build stronger relationships, and never miss an opportunity, because that's what your business and your customers deserve.
Quo is not just a phone system. It's a smart system. It's got a built-in AI that will log your calls, write down summaries, and even set up your next steps. And if for some reason you can't answer the phone, Quo's AI agent can qualify your leads, route the calls to the right person, and make sure that no customer is ever left behind. Even after hours, Quo has your back. It keeps the lights on while you actually sleep.
That's why more than 90,000 businesses are already running on Quo. And Quo is offering 3 Martini Lunch listeners 20% off your first 6 months at quo.com/3ML. That's QUO.com/3ML. And you can keep your existing number for free with Quo. Quo, no missed calls, no missed customers. All right, Jim, on to our crazy martini now. And as regular listeners know, you have ties to South Carolina, including the district, I believe, that Nancy Mace currently represents. But Nancy Mace is not running for re-election to her district in South Carolina. She's running for governor next year. And according to the latest polls, which is obviously quite early, she is neck and neck with the lieutenant governor in the race to replace Henry McMaster. But Nancy Mace is also famous for other things. She's famous for saying and doing odd things that then get her in trouble, and then she pretends it really proves she's a fighter and things like that. So, we talked about the time that she was at a Tim Scott prayer breakfast, and she was telling the story about how the guy she wasn't married to was trying to bring her back to bed, and she would have been late for the prayer breakfast. She apparently goes through staff pretty regularly. She's had this thing in this current Congress where she'll make serious criminal accusations against people on the House floor and committee where the speech and debate clause covers her from any prosecution, but she won't talk about it anywhere else. Well, the latest incident is Nancy Mace at the airport, throwing a temper tantrum, according to the New York Post, on Thursday at the Charleston International Airport, loudly cursing and berating officers simply trying to escort her to the gate. The 2 Charleston County Aviation Authority Police Department officers who bore the brunt of Mace's fury had been waiting for the Congresswoman's white BMW to arrive at the airport curb so they could whisk her to the gate. but they never saw the vehicle arrive because she showed up in a BMW that was a different color. The officers were then notified that Mace had arrived just 15 minutes after they were expecting the Congresswoman, and that she was not met at the curb, so she wasn't happy. She was very irate, profanity-laced tirade, according to a number of people, saying that they were bleeping incompetent, and this is no way to treat a bleeping U.S. representatives. They say the entire walk to the gate was cursing and complaining, and her response to this is on X, of course. She says, if incompetence is your high bar, we're never going to get along. And in a Mace administration, you will quickly find yourself out of a job. If you know, you know. So, Jim, a lot of candidates in this race. Nancy Mace, definitely good at bringing drama wherever she goes. What do you make of her and her potential to be governor?
Well, first of all, Greg, I go down to visit my parents at least twice a year. And in that district, I'm not saying I see thin blue line flags everywhere, but I know I've seen some. So I just want to point out, if you're like, this is no way to treat a member of Congress. How about a way to treat two officers of the law who've must have picked the short straw and get the all important duty of escorting the Congresswoman to her gate? Boy, like, by the way, a lot of it's not unusual to do this for a child traveling alone. But when you're a grown adult, I think you can find out where your gate is on your own. Entitled, spoiled, diva-ish, obnoxious, disrespectful to law enforcement officers. But by the way, let me point out, if she had this kind of tirade in the TSA line after being told for the millionths of times that, you want to have your less than 3 ounce liquid or gel into a plastic bag or something, okay, I could have cut her some slack. I get kind of annoyed by TSA people, but really, you're a member of Congress. We should be able to expect a little better. I also want to point out that, like, when she's running for governor, this is not exactly a field of little-known people. You mentioned, being tied with the Lieutenant Governor, Pamela Yvette, State Senator Josh Krimble, also another member of the state's delegation to Congress, Ralph Norman, is running. And the guy who, look, if people are wondering who are Jim's sources in the state of South Carolina, giving him a perspective on state lawmakers, sources who may or may not be in my family tree. I've just been singing the praises of State Attorney General Alan Wilson for a long time. Now, by the way, it's the son of Joe Wilson. You lie, but he's been in this job for 2 terms and just been like your platonic ideal of what you want a Republican State Attorney General to do. And I'm going to point out that, like, probably nationwide, you haven't heard a great deal of Henry McMaster. He's not had presidential ambitions. I suggest most Americans have heard of his predecessor, Nikki Haley. But I've always kind of figured that, like, look, South Carolina is a pretty darn conservative state. This really should be like the proving ground or testing ground for, like, how good and effective can you be and how conservative can you be? Because this is the electorate that should have that Overton window goes pretty darn far to the right in the state of South Carolina. By the way, I also should point out, and again, based on experience down there, the state has a lot of Republicans, which is not the same thing as having a lot of conservatives. There are a lot of state legislators who like their big spending, like their projects, like their, and so the idea of, like, fiscal conservatism is actually a little bit tougher to sell in the state of South Carolina than you might expect. Everybody's going to come down and say, oh, I'm the true conservative choice or something like that. Now, of these names that I've mentioned, my guess is that the only name that people outside the state of South Carolina have heard much of is Nancy Mace, because her life is this never-ending reality show, soap opera, remember that she was walking around Congress with the giant A because she felt persecuted and all that stuff. And if you want to be a contestant on Big Brother, go for that. If you want a reality show, if you want a show on a cable news, then go for that. Don't be governor, because that's a real job. That's something we have real responsibilities to, and we don't have time for diva-ish and, oh, look at this stunt that I pulled and all that kind of stuff. So the fact that she's tied for first or in a good spot, unnerving. And again, if it remains a significant 5-way race, maybe 20-30% might be enough, depending on how the rest of the field splits. So it's very early. We're more than a year. Actually, we're more than a year from election day. We're probably the primary election day is June 9th, presumably. And they'll have a runoff on June 23rd. This is one of those states where you got to do above a certain threshold to get it. So, like, it's not like Nancy Mace being the Republican nominee is guaranteed, but you're probably looking at 6, 7, 8 months to really get some traction against her. So I'll be hoping for it. Not quite an endorsement on this podcast. I'm just saying I've heard very good things about Alan Wilson. And again, I hope that Republican primary voters in the state aren't in kind of autopilot and just vote for the name they've heard the most about, because I think the state can do significantly better than Nancy Mace.
Yeah, she's good at getting attention for herself. I don't know how much she actually accomplishes. So pay attention to what's actually been done in the record. So real quick, Jim, good day for our teams yesterday. The Bears almost found a way to blow a 14-point lead with 2 minutes to go, but they pulled it out after giving up that entire lead. The Jets did not lose because they had a bye week, and poor Cincinnati Bengals fans. They gave up a 14-point lead to the Jets last week, only to watch the Jets score 15 in the last couple minutes. And yesterday, they got those 15 points to come back, and then they still lost anyway. So Bengals fans, we've been there.
Absolutely brutal for Bengals fans. My sympathies. I'm very tempted to trash talk against you, because who else am I going to trash talk against? But I just also, but you point out that the Jets did not lose. And look, if any team could manage to lose during the bye week, it's the Jets. They also lost ground in the tankathon in the draft order. They're now picking third. So if that's your measurement of success, they actually did lose during bye week. So there's that. Greg, I'm kind of curious. Are you finding it disorienting to have the Bears looking pretty good this year?
Well, they're 5-3. They haven't beaten anybody that's particularly great, and most of the wins still come with drama that shouldn't, because they make things more interesting than they are. But yes, the fact that they're in the hunt, they're tied for second in the division, and there's still reason to pay attention to the games because they matter. It's a good place to be in November.
I was going to say, when the Jets are bad, there's a saying among the fan base: meaningful games in December. We're not saying we need to make the playoffs. We're just saying we want the games in December to matter. And of course, the New York Jets find a way to make the games in November don't matter. That's what happens when you start out 0-7. But you have meaningful games probably for the rest of the way. You guys have to, at 5-3, you're probably going to be in the playoff hunt till at least early to mid-December or something. So I salute you. I congratulate you, and Cincinnati Bengals fans. I had thought that after you lose to the Jets in that fashion, you should just disband the franchise. You just should stop operating, just blow up the stadium, and salt the earth, and never, But they're going to keep playing, and I don't know about you, but it does make me happy to know that there's at least one fan base that might be more miserable than we are right now.
Yes. Well, if the Bears had actually blown that 14-point lead and lost the game, it would have been pretty miserable today too. So we were very close to being in that position. But anyway, Jim, happy Monday. We'll do it again tomorrow. See you then.
See you tomorrow, Greg.
Jim Garrity, National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks so much for being with us today. Please be sure to subscribe to the 3 Martini Lunch podcast. If you don't already, tell your friends about us as well. Thanks also for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. Please keep those coming. Get us on your home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch podcast. Follow us both on X. He's at Jim Garrity. I'm at Greg Corombos. And as mentioned last week, coming soon, Facebook and Instagram. Have a great Monday. Join us again Tuesday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.